On July 1, 1898, during the Spanish-American War, American forces launched one of the most famous assaults in U.S. military history. Volunteer cavalry known as the Rough Riders, led by future President Theodore Roosevelt, charged up San Juan Hill near Santiago, Cuba. Their victory became a defining moment in the war and helped establish Roosevelt as a national hero. Just a few weeks later, Spain agreed to peace terms that marked the end of its colonial empire in the Americas. Under the Treaty of Paris, Spain gave up control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines, while Cuba came under temporary U.S. military occupation before becoming formally independent in 1902. For the United States, the war represented more than a military victory. It marked the country's emergence as a global power with growing influence far beyond its own borders. Only 3 years later, Theodore Roosevelt became President of the United States. During his presidency, he transformed American foreign policy by promoting what became known as the Big Stick approach, a strategy summarized by his famous phrase, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." Roosevelt argued that diplomacy should always be backed by military strength. Combined with the Monroe Doctrine, this policy strengthened American influence throughout the Western Hemisphere and shaped U.S. involvement in Latin America for decades. Throughout the 20th century, Washington repeatedly intervened in the region to protect its strategic and economic interests. Supporters viewed these actions as necessary for regional stability, while critics argued they expanded American influence at the expense of neighboring countries. Today, more than a century later, many analysts believe elements of those same ideas continue to influence U.S. foreign policy. Although the world has changed dramatically since Roosevelt's time, the Western Hemisphere remains a region of major strategic importance for Washington. One country, in particular, continues to attract attention: Cuba. Located just 90 miles from the coast of Florida, Cuba has occupied a unique place in American national security planning for generations. From the Cuban Revolution in 1959 to the Cold War missile crisis of 1962, relations between Havana and Washington have often been marked by tension, sanctions, and political rivalry. Even after the Cold War ended, those differences never fully disappeared. In recent years, economic pressure on Cuba has intensified. Long-standing U.S. sanctions, combined with declining tourism, inflation, fuel shortages, and the country's own economic challenges, have created one of the most difficult periods in modern Cuban history. At the same time, Cuba has continued to maintain close political and economic ties with countries such as Russia and China. These relationships have drawn increasing attention from U.S. policymakers, who view foreign military or intelligence cooperation near American territory as a significant national security concern. As global competition between major powers continues to grow, the Caribbean has once again become strategically important. Military exercises, intelligence gathering, economic sanctions, and diplomatic pressure have all become part of a broader competition for influence in the region. The key question is no longer whether Cuba matters to the United States. It is how far Washington is willing to go to protect what it sees as its strategic interests, and how Havana will respond under growing economic and political pressure. To understand why Cuba remains at the center of this geopolitical rivalry, we first need to examine the island's deep economic challenges and the international relationships that have shaped its modern history. For decades, Cuba's economy has faced serious challenges. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 ended billions of dollars in economic support, forcing the island into a severe recession known as the Special Period. Although Cuba eventually recovered to some extent, many structural problems remained. Today, the country continues to struggle with low productivity, aging infrastructure, limited access to foreign investment, and ongoing U.S. sanctions. These factors, combined with the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, have contributed to shortages of food, medicine, fuel, and electricity. One of Cuba's biggest challenges is energy. The island produces only part of the oil it consumes, meaning it depends heavily on imported fuel to keep its power plants running. When those supplies are interrupted, the effects are felt almost immediately. Rolling blackouts become more frequent, public transportation is disrupted, factories slow production, and daily life becomes increasingly difficult for millions of people. For many years, Venezuela was Cuba's most important energy partner. In exchange for medical professionals and technical assistance, Venezuela supplied large amounts of oil to the island under agreements between the two governments. However, Venezuela's own economic crisis dramatically reduced its ability to maintain those shipments. As oil production declined and international sanctions increased, deliveries to Cuba became less reliable. The result has been a growing energy shortage that has affected nearly every sector of the Cuban economy. At the same time, inflation has made everyday goods more expensive, while many young Cubans have chosen to leave the country in search of better opportunities abroad. The government has introduced economic reforms in an effort to attract foreign investment and increase private business activity, but progress has been slow. These domestic problems have also become an international issue. For Washington, Cuba's economic weakness presents both a challenge and an opportunity. U.S. policymakers have long argued that economic pressure could encourage political and economic reforms on the island. Cuban leaders, however, maintain that decades of American sanctions are the primary cause of many of the country's economic difficulties. This disagreement has shaped U.S.-Cuba relations for more than 60 years. But economics is only one part of the story. Another reason Cuba remains strategically important is its location. Sitting at the entrance to the Gulf of Mexico and close to major shipping routes, the island occupies one of the most valuable positions in the Caribbean. During the Cold War, this geography made Cuba a key player in the rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. Today, a new era of great power competition has renewed interest in the island. Russia continues to maintain political and military ties with Cuba, while China has expanded its economic presence throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. American officials have also expressed concern about reports of Chinese intelligence-related activities in Cuba, although the exact nature and scale of those facilities remain the subject of public debate. For Washington, any expansion of foreign military or intelligence capabilities so close to the U.S. mainland is viewed with caution. This reflects a broader shift in American national security priorities. Rather than focusing on a single region, the United States is now balancing competition with multiple global powers at the same time. As a result, developments in the Caribbean are increasingly viewed through the larger lens of strategic competition with China and Russia. Military activity in the region reflects this reality. The U.S. Navy and Coast Guard regularly conduct operations throughout the Caribbean to combat drug trafficking, protect shipping lanes, provide disaster relief, and support regional security partners. Surveillance aircraft also operate in international airspace to monitor maritime activity and maintain awareness of events across the region. These operations are routine, but they also serve as a reminder of America's continued military presence close to Cuba. Meanwhile, Havana continues to strengthen diplomatic ties with countries willing to invest in its economy despite ongoing sanctions. This growing competition raises an important question. Will Cuba become another major flashpoint in the broader rivalry between the world's leading powers, or will diplomacy prevent tensions from escalating further? The answer depends not only on decisions made in Havana and Washington, but also on the actions of governments around the world. Because in today's geopolitical landscape, even a relatively small island can have enormous strategic importance. As tensions continue, the biggest question is simple: what comes next? While headlines often focus on military movements or political speeches, the reality is that governments usually have several options before considering the use of force. In Cuba's case, the United States has a range of policy tools available, and each comes with its own advantages and risks. The first option is to maintain the current strategy of economic pressure. For decades, U.S. sanctions have been a central part of Washington's policy toward Cuba. Supporters argue that sanctions are intended to pressure the Cuban government into introducing political and economic reforms. Critics, however, believe the restrictions have placed a greater burden on ordinary Cubans than on the country's leadership. Whether sanctions achieve their long-term goals remains a subject of debate among policymakers and analysts. Another possibility is increased diplomatic engagement. History shows that relations between the two countries have not always been hostile. In 2014, the Obama administration announced a historic effort to restore diplomatic relations with Cuba. Embassies reopened, travel restrictions were eased, and communication between the two governments improved. Although many of those changes were later reversed, the period demonstrated that dialogue is possible when both sides are willing to negotiate. Future U.S. administrations could choose to pursue a similar path, or take a much tougher approach, depending on changing political priorities. A third possibility is continued strategic competition without direct conflict. This is perhaps the most likely scenario. In this case, Washington would continue monitoring foreign influence in Cuba while using economic pressure, diplomacy, intelligence gathering, and cooperation with regional allies to protect its interests. Havana, meanwhile, would likely continue seeking stronger relationships with countries such as Russia and China to reduce its economic isolation. Rather than a military confrontation, both sides would compete through economics, diplomacy, and international partnerships. Of course, discussions about military action often appear in political commentary and media analysis. However, any large-scale military operation would involve significant political, economic, and humanitarian risks. Even if such an operation were successful militarily, rebuilding infrastructure, restoring public services, and stabilizing the country would require enormous resources and long-term international cooperation. For that reason, many experts believe diplomacy and economic policy remain far more likely tools than direct military intervention. At the same time, Cuba faces difficult choices of its own. The country's leaders must balance economic reform with political stability while responding to growing public demands for improved living conditions. Finding that balance has become increasingly challenging as the economy struggles with inflation, shortages, and limited access to international financing. The coming years could prove to be some of the most important in Cuba's modern history. The island sits at the crossroads of geography, history, and global politics. Its location has made it strategically valuable for more than a century, and that reality is unlikely to change anytime soon. For the United States, Cuba remains an important neighbor only 90 miles from Florida. For Cuba, maintaining its sovereignty while addressing serious economic challenges will continue to be one of its greatest tests. Whatever path both nations choose, the decisions made today will influence the future of the Caribbean for years to come. History has shown that tensions between countries can rise quickly, but it has also shown that diplomacy can prevent conflicts before they begin. Whether the future brings greater cooperation or deeper rivalry remains uncertain. One thing, however, is clear. The story of Cuba and the United States is far from over. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more in-depth analysis of history, geopolitics, and international affairs, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes. What do you think the future holds for U.S.-Cuba relations? Could diplomacy improve relations, or will strategic competition continue to shape the region? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next documentary.